Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at My Expat Taxes. For my fellow Americans out there, we all know tax season is upon us, and for anyone who's ever had the pleasure of dealing with multiple tax agencies in multiple countries, you know this can be a challenging experience. That's why when it comes to dealing with anything tax-related abroad, I always recommend hiring a pro to help you navigate this unknown space. In my experience, this not only saves you time and spares you from the unnecessary headaches, it also has literally saved me thousands of dollars in taxes over the years. So I am super excited to introduce you to My Expat Taxes, a true pro in this space that focuses 100% on U.S. expat taxes. Whether you're filing for 2023, catching up on back taxes, predicting a future tax obligation for a future move abroad, or just looking for some guidance, My Expat Taxes has your back with speedy and affordable online filing options and real human accountants to assist you as needed. Join the more than 16,000 other Americans living abroad who have used their services by visiting myexpattaxes.com via the link in the show notes. My guest today is my friend Camilla Boyer, who joins me from Madrid in Spain, but she's originally from the UK and has spent time living abroad in a few different countries and recently made the move again from London to Madrid. And not only that, she's also started a business the exact same week. So she's been through a lot and had to learn a few things along the way that she shares with us. But mostly we spend some time talking about the mindset that you need to have if you want to live abroad and some of the questions you need to ask yourself and what it's like living in Madrid and why she ended up choosing Spain over all the places in the world that she could have gone to. This was a lot of fun catching up with someone that I've been wanting to get to know a little bit better for a long time. Camilla's done some amazing work at places like Twitter and checkout.com, amongst others. So really cool to hear the perspective of someone who's chased their dreams, lived abroad, done exactly what they wanted to do in their career, and is now embarking on a new journey in multiple ways. Please help me in welcoming Camilla to About Abroad. So I recall when we first met, we were talking in Berlin, and I was thinking, I can't quite pinpoint your accent. And I was like, is she American? Is she British? Is she from some island that I don't know about? And you briefly mentioned, but we never got to go any further on this because it was a whirlwind of a couple of days together. You grew up, is it correct that you grew up in London, or you were born in London when you grew up in America, or the other way around? How did, like, what's the background story here?
Yeah. So I'm pretty lucky because I have this like permanent icebreaker in my life, which is my voice. So anytime anybody meets me, they're like, are you South African? Are you English? Where are you from? And, it's great. We always have for them, an interesting conversation. But yeah, you're close. I was born and raised in London. I lived there until I was 18. My family's not British though, so I definitely count myself as a Londoner more than I do a Brit. I moved to the US to go to college, and then I ended up staying there for 8 years, I think. Came back to London, spent another 6 years there, and then moved to Madrid recently. So I'm a sort of a combination of like English, American, and Spanish, both by blood and by culture.
Ah, that's fascinating. I've never heard somebody say before, like I knew exactly what you meant when you said it, but I don't know if I've ever heard anybody articulate it so perfectly. Like, consider myself more of a Londoner than a Brit. That's super interesting.
Yeah, I think the thing is, it's easy for anyone to be a Londoner. Like you moved to London, and I consider you a Londoner, basically. Whereas like a Brit is more to do with like your blood, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very cool. And you spent 8 years in the US, and where were you in the US?
All in California all that time.
Oh, in California.
I spent like 6 months, I think, in New York in the middle there. But yeah, mostly California.
Wow. Man, you got to experience the West Coast, Best Coast, huh?
I sure did. Although it's kind of funny because when I would talk to my friends back home in London or, my parents' friends, everybody thought that I was living this like sunny palm tree surfer life because that's what people assume that all of California is like. Whereas anyone from California or probably from the US really will tell you that Northern California is a very, very different vibe. And like my experience of California was much more like gray San Francisco tech nerds and startup founders. And that was my world. And to this day, I still don't know how to surf. So 8 years wasted, I suppose.
That is so true. I love when stereotypes are just like really hardly applied. Like I've met so many people who, first of all, I'm from North Carolina, so people abroad hear Carolina, they think California because they've never heard of North Carolina, and they're like, oh, cool, like yeah, surfing, palm trees, LA. And like that is all of California to them, and for a lot of people, that's like all of the U.S. or like Texas is all like that's the U.S. in their
Yeah,
mind.
completely.
Did it, was that like, I always find it kind of fascinating. We talked about this on About Abroad before with other guests that have been, like grew up in another country, but then went to spend time in the US. In your situation, you like ended up in the Bay Area tech space, like kind of the mecca for that, industry. And like, was that part of the plan? Like, was that a dream? Was that something you like wanted to go do, or did it just kind of like unfold that way and that's where you ended up?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, the Bay Area was my like Disneyland. Like that's where I wanted to be. That's like what I aspired to when I was growing up. And I just had this picture of this place. And I'm not gonna lie, I definitely was one of the people growing up who thought that I would be like surfing all the time. And but I wasn't that disappointed when it turned out not to be the reality because the reality was very cool in a different way. And I think being in the Bay Area and being in San Francisco for the formative years of my like young adulthood of 18 to 24 taught me to think differently and think in a way that has served me super well in my both my personal and my professional life. So yeah, I think it's I didn't get the California that I was expecting, but I got one that served me a lot better, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think it did too. I mean, you've ended up, you've done some pretty epic things in that space and recently founded your own company, which I'm excited to dive into as well. And, yeah, I mean, I think it's really, I think it's really cool to see when people are like very intentional about what they wanted to do and made that happen. And when it involves moving to another country, like that's a big deal. That's not like super easy to do. So you have to like really be very intentional. You have to have like mapped that out, and when it actually works out and it happens for people, it makes me really happy to see it all play out that way.
Yeah, completely. And I think I attribute part of my moving abroad several times in my life now, partly to like the mindset that I kind of learned in California. And I think like, it's all about like being brave and like lowering the barrier to entry in your head. That applies to both entrepreneurship and to moving internationally, I think. And a big thing for me was like, I used to look at these things I used to have these things on pedestals, and I used to think that like, when it came to entrepreneurship, like only the Steve Jobs of the world were the ones who had the right to be founders or be successful founders. And when it came to moving abroad, like, it was sort of a one day thing, but not like a today thing. And I think being able to kind of zoom in on those dreams in a way that makes them feel more tangible is something that I learned in California, to be honest.
Hmm. Do you think like I've actually met some people that I've talked to both like on the air here on About Abroad and then also a bit more candidly, I would say like off the air about how, coming from other countries, they, this can go with like the origin and the destination can change in this conversation. But I think it's really interesting how like you grow up in one place. And so when you go through school and you talk to people around you, you get like ideas that just implanted in your head about what the next phases of life should be, or what your limitations should be. And I would say like, people that grew up in the Bay Area, for example, like they grow up with one set of expectations about what what it means to have a career or make money or, build a life for yourself, whatever it may be. And if you grow up in another part of the world, whether that's in the US or in the UK or some other country, like you have a different set of expectations by default. Obviously, this changes person to person. But I find it really interesting when I talk to people like about that, like where you come from and then where you go to, and like how your expectations for what the possibilities are can change. Did you kind of find that? I'm sensing a little bit of that in your story, but like, was that your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so much about like exposing yourself to different things where you get the opportunity to do so, right? And I think like having grown up in, well, what was Europe at the time, having grown up in London, I just had a sense that the world was fairly close and it was fairly easy for me to get around and go places and move if I wanted to. And then I moved to California, and California is really far. I mean, forgive me for stating the obvious, but like, even the East Coast, you're a little bit closer to stuff than you are in California. And like, I met people who had never been outside of the state, and that's not an uncommon thing in the US. And that's because it's just not an easy experience to have. I actually have a friend from North Carolina who's starting a nonprofit that helps US people get their passports for the first time and travel internationally, because his concept is like, it's by seeing the world or by having those experiences that you come to realize that it is actually within reach for you. And I think like I'm lucky, having grown up in Europe, that came a little bit more naturally to me.
Yeah, I mean, especially growing up in London, right? Like you can literally hop off from one of three major airports to like literally anywhere in the world. And geographically, you're kind of positioned to be able to access Europe, the Americas. Obviously, you can get around to other parts of the world, but like that's pretty easy access. I work on a team with people who are as far like east as like the Philippines, and people who are on the West Coast in California or Seattle or something of the US. And like, it's easier for me based here in Europe to work with the people in the Eastern time zones, like all the way as far over as the Philippines, for example. So like my friend who works over in Seattle, like she's always like, it's lonely out here, when you're working on a global team and people are spread around the world.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just curious if you think like that's a fair assessment, because obviously you grew up on the East Coast, you grew up in North Carolina. Like, did you think that fewer people that you grew up with are kind of thinking about that move internationally because they were just exposed to it less when they were younger? Or, I mean, that's clearly not the case for you.
Yeah, I feel like I never left the country until I was 18 years old. I was like in the U.S. my whole life, and I grew up with like two parents that were a flight attendant and a pilot that traveled extensively internationally prior to me, being born, and then even into the years after that. Like, so it was like the opportunity should have been there, but it's very much so a place where like you some people hardly leave the state or their region. Like I spent most of my life in the southeast of the US, and that was just like my world, and and it wasn't until I got to like started approaching college and thinking about what I wanted to do when I got there, where it was like this study abroad thing became like a fixture of what I was going to do. And I had some friends that were older that were starting to explore. And I realized like, oh, wait, I have this like deep interest in seeing the rest of the world that I didn't even know was there. And then you get a little taste of it, and it's a little bit addicting.
That's for sure.
Yeah, it's which I mean is kind of cool for you. Like I'm happy we're having this conversation now, because you've obviously got a little bit of the travel bug. Like it takes a lot of effort to move abroad to a new country, and you've just done it for the I don't know, what would this be, your third move abroad? So now you're living in Spain. You've just moved to Madrid, and this is all. And then at the same time, like I just realized as we're getting started, you started a business at the exact same time that you moved to Spain. So like you've just taken on quite a bit.
I back in January, in the space of 1 week, I tipped my entire life upside down. That's basically what happened, and like the path that got me there was like several years of thinking about it, basically. And like, I realized that in that week in January, that to all the people who are friends with me on social media or in real life or connected to me on LinkedIn or whatever it is, it probably looked easy because I literally started my company on a Monday and moved to Madrid on a Tuesday. So it was like a really, really crazy week. But the truth is that it was like years of preparation in the background, and like not just tactical preparation, but also like emotional work to get myself to a place that I felt not just like logistically ready to do these things, but also that I felt confident enough to do these things and feel like, you know, I was going to be successful. Because I don't know about everyone else out there, but like I have some degree of risk aversion of like, you know, my life was pretty good. I had like a great stable job. I was doing well. I was living in the city that I was from. I was living not far from my parents. I had an extensive friend network. You know, things were basically good. And yet I was restless. And so, you know, I had this feeling of like, okay, what do I do about this? But how do I do it in a way that feels controlled enough that I am not terrified about my life falling apart, you know, the week after I make both of these decisions. And that took a really long time to get to that point.
What do you think you were like? What was? Oh, I have so many questions. This is fascinating. So let me back up and not ask you multiple at one time. What was the restlessness like stemming from? Because you're right. By like all, you know, from the outside looking in, like, and you made a great point about like LinkedIn, like watching you from afar on social media. I'm like, Camilla's killing it. Life's good. She's living in a great city. She's from there, like all checking all the boxes. Career's obviously moving in the right direction. Why shake it up and make a change? So what was the restlessness sourced from?
You know, I have asked myself that question so many times, and I still don't know. I still don't know the answer. And I think it's a funny thing. I'm sure that I'm not the only one who's had this experience of like, you just feel something in your gut and like, you're not sure where it comes from. It doesn't really necessarily even make sense, but there's just something inside of you that's saying like, it's time to make a change. And it's not that things are bad, and it's not that, you know, anything is wrong. But I also think I've always really had a sense of like, life is not the dress rehearsal, it's the real performance. And like, it's life is also short, and I'm only going to get one chance to be in my late 20s, early 30s, this kind of like amazing time of your life where you have a lot of freedom and you're healthy and your family's healthy and all of these sorts of things. And I was just sort of sitting there thinking like, I'm really happy right now, but does that mean that I want to do this forever? Or are there other things that I want to do that I really only feel like I can do now because the window of opportunity might close as time goes on? And I think maybe that was like the root cause of the restlessness, was me just looking around being like, I'm not actually being content is making me discontent.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny enough, she also moved to Spain from the US, but a previous guest we had here on the show was saying how she had to trade in her good life for a great life. And the source of the greatness that she was seeking was this like bit of adventure and, you know, just being like, it was much more, and I sense this from you as well. It's like much more of a running to something, not running from something kind of energy. And I think that's important to think about if you're going to make a move abroad. Like almost anybody that I've met that had a lot of success, meaning like that they just the experience was positive, where they were running to the adventure and the excitement and not running from like a bad situation or escaping.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's completely true. And I think like the interesting thing about trying to run away from anything, and like, you know, I had a great life. Like I had my ups and downs just like anyone else. And like, I think the thing about running from things is like, you can't outrun yourself. So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter where you live. Like you can move anywhere you want in the world, but you're still going to be your same person. You're still going to have your internal baggage and, you know, whatever else it is. So it actually doesn't work. And until you get to a place where you do feel like you're running to and not from, you're going to end up dissatisfied with the outcome, because it's not a solution.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what happened? What fire got lit under you that made you do this? Like start a business on a Monday and move to a new country on a Tuesday? Because that, like, even if you are ruminating on it for years, which I'll be honest with you, like, I'm 100% guilty of this. Like, I've toyed around with moving to different countries and looked at all the details and thought about, like, okay, this is the visa process and like all the things, and it eats up a lot of RAM in the brain. But like at some point you do just have to pull the trigger and take the leap. And so like to do that on two fronts at the same time is super unique. So like what happened? Like what was the impetus for finally pulling the trigger?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not a coincidence that it lined up kind of with a calendar year situation. I spent the sort of latter half, well, a lot of 2023 on the professional front, but the latter half of 2023 kind of both on the personal and professional front planning for this and saying like, okay, this is what I want my 2024 to look like. And then, it's obviously a hard, I was like, well, I'm not going to do it in December because I'm just going to come right back for Christmas, and nobody cares about new stuff in December when it comes to the company. So, obviously like new year, new me, new country, new company, let's do it. January, here we go. And so that's kind of how the timing played out. And I gave myself a couple weeks at the beginning of January to just like come back to life after the holidays and really feel ready for everything. But I mean, I already had my flights booked and like I had my launch video recorded and all this stuff. So it was pretty intentional. But I didn't realize that it was going to end up being literally one day after the other. That was or like in the same week. I was like, I'm going to do both of these things in January. And then when it ended up being like in the same week, my poor family had just like whiplash from the whole thing. They were like, what is going on here? Are you okay?
Wait, one minor detail there. Did you left the company that you were with before starting your own business, correct? Or did you like jump ship and start the new one on the same day?
Yeah. So good question. Well, it's a little bit more of a longer answer. So like going back to my thing of like being a somewhat risk averse founder, this is something I've been working towards my whole career. I always knew that I wanted to start my own thing and work for myself. I wrote my business school application about that back in like 2016 or 17. And so after each job in the last sort of 5-6 years, I would ask myself, like, am I ready? And the answer was always no. And I think that that's a little bit a female imposter syndrome thing, or maybe not just confined to women, but a little bit of an imposter syndrome thing. But also a little bit of I want to make sure that I can actually deliver the maximum value for my clients thing of like, I want to really feel like I've gotten to the top of my game in-house somewhere, and then I want to go off and do my own thing. And so over the course of 2023, I was working through that professionally. And I was still in my job. I was leading communications for a big fintech company, which was, the greatest responsibility that I had had and kind of the highest that you can go in communications at a lot of companies. And at the same time, I was like killing myself, parallel pathing the building of my own thing and thinking about, trying to do all the unpaid bits of the work of like, what's my value prop? Who's my target audience? What's my company going to be called? What's my brand? What's the website going to look like? All of that really foundational stuff. So I stayed at that company, and like, I never let me building my own thing compromise the quality of my work at that company or the amount of time that I was putting towards that. I just like didn't really have weekends or much of a social life for a little bit of time there. But I left that job in like towards the end of November, and then had December to figure my life out and chill a little bit, and then launched everything and made all the changes in January.
Awesome. Okay. Got the timeline. Also, like I do love that you're sharing so much about the like methodical way that you approach this, because I've had people on the show that do, you can do this whole thing in a lot of different ways, right? Like if you're going to make a move abroad and or like start your own company, it kind of, the two are sort of like run parallel to each other. Like if you remove the topic of what you're actually talking about and just tell the story, they sound very similar. In your case, you just happen to do both at the same time, which makes it doubly as fascinating. But like a lot of people will approach this move abroad thing in like a very whiplash sort of way, where it's just like, I'm doing it. Like I haven't really planned it out, but I'm just buying a one-way ticket and I'll figure it out. And then other people have this like plan, and then there's people that are in between. But your methodology is very like, I can see like the risk averseness, but also it takes someone who's willing to accept some risk to be able to do this. So you're probably like the way that you've gone about it probably resonates with a lot of people, because a lot of us are really naturally risk averse, but we need to know that there's a safe way to go about accepting some risk, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think actually you're totally right that like the starting of the company and the moving abroad, there's a lot of parallels between those two things. I think for me, the moving abroad thing, although it wasn't a spontaneous decision, it was much more of an emotional decision than starting my company, I guess. And I think that's something that a lot of people who move abroad probably can, or think about moving abroad, can probably relate to this feeling of like, I found it very valuable to like tune into what felt good to me. And I've always loved I took a like design thinking class in college once, and I've always loved the idea that I learned there of like, instead of navigating, which implies that you have a destination in mind, it's this idea of wayfinding, which is that you take cues from your environment as you go and trust that those cues that you're taking in real time will lead you to the destination that you're supposed to be heading towards. So it's like the difference between having a North Star and letting the wind kind of guide you, right? And I think for me, the moving abroad was much more of that latter, of the wayfinding thing. And I just found myself like constantly being pushed towards Spain and constantly wanting to be around Spanish people and Spanish things and all of that sort of thing. And like inch by inch, spending more and more time in Spain every year until ultimately it was like my heart's really telling me that this is where I need to be, and I think that's a good way of doing it. I think like, where you run into like a more risky situation is if you're like, I'm just going to like spin a globe, pick a spot on the map and just go. And you have like no rhyme or reason to kind of be in that place. Right. Then I think like, each to their own, but to me, that's like the riskier of the approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really cool that like you've obviously felt this like connection with Spain in particular. This is something I was going to ask you. I didn't know if there was a logistical or like more like logical reason to choose Spain. In theory, you could go anywhere, or if there was like, just this natural pull to the country. So you sort of already answered that, but can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, ever since Brexit, I don't have the luxury of going anywhere I want as much as I used to, very sadly. But I have some Spanish blood. So my grandmother is Spanish on my father's side, and she has lived in Spain pretty much her whole life, still lives here, in Menorca, which is one of the islands. And so I grew up spending time in Spain, spending my summers in Spain. If you met my family, you wouldn't say that we're a Spanish family. So I have sort of weirdly ended up being the most Spanish of the boyos. But I think something about that meant that I had just kind of a natural affinity for it. And I've spoken, good, not great Spanish my whole life. So that was helpful for the move as well. And I think, I don't know. I think there was something about, and the pandemic affected us all in different ways, but I think there was something about that time. I spent a bit more time in Spain during that time. And it also just gave me a chance to think about like the types of people that I like being around and like the lifestyle. And, the other thing was just like my daily routine, my daily rhythm. Like the pandemic was the first time with everybody working from home that I was like, wait a second, I hate getting up early and like I hate eating dinner at 6 p.m. Like these are just like not things that work for me personally. Like I love to sleep late. I love to work out in the morning, but late. And I like to work late. Like my peak work hours are like 4 to 8 p.m., which like don't constitute a 9 to 5, really. So there were just a few things that I realized during that time of like, oh, I think maybe Spain is more conducive for me. And then ultimately, yeah, I ended up here.
We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at Lexity. I've lived abroad in various countries, and one common denominator I've found is that dealing with foreign bureaucracy is a nightmare. Trying to navigate visa and immigration waters in another language is not something I'd recommend ever trying on your own, even for the most experienced of us. So when I recently had to renew my Spanish visa again, I turned it over to the pros at Lexity. They've already helped more than 5,000 expats and digital nomads find a home and thrive in countries like Portugal, or in my case, Spain, also Italy, France, and Greece. Some very desirable locations indeed. So whether you're trying to obtain your first visa abroad, purchase a property, or work through international tax issues, Lexity's team of friendly lawyers is here to simplify your journey. The team is super knowledgeable, bilingual, and thorough, and I seriously cannot recommend their services enough. My experience working with them has been incredible, and I can honestly say I don't know that I would have EU permanent residency if it wasn't for the help of the team at Lexity. So if you're ready to make your move abroad, then Lexity is offering an exclusive discount to About Abroad listeners. Grab 10% off your first service with the code AboutAbroad2023 and learn more over at Lexity.com in the show notes and start your abroad journey today. If you've made it this far into the episode and you're still enjoying yourself, then I would love to ask a quick favor. Open up the app that you're using to listen to this podcast and leave a quick review. You can do this in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and really just about any platform that allows podcast listening now. If you can't find that in the interface of the app, then scroll down in the show notes and find ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, and you should be able to leave it from there. Thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Isn't it funny how like in theory, right? Like you and I both have a lot of autonomy. And so in theory, you could be a founder, run your business from London and work from 4 to 8 peak hours and go to bed later and wake up later. But it's the rhythm of life that you just like fall into no matter where you are. I lived in Spain for over 4 years up until recently. And like, I really like when I'm in Spain, I fall right into that cycle. It becomes normal to eat dinner at 9:30, 10 o'clock. And it feels very natural to take a 3-hour lunch break or 2-hour lunch break. And you know, to like my social battery is charged more because people are just out and living in la calle, as they say, and like just enjoying life outside. And in theory, I could do all those things wherever I am. But like when you get into that rhythm with the other humans around you, it makes it a whole lot easier.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Completely. And it's funny because I remember as a fangirl of your podcast, I remember listening to the episode with Alex Hernandez, and this was like in January, and I was about to move here, and you guys were talking about the Spanish lifestyle, and I was like, wow, I cannot wait. I can't wait. It's just like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And like, you just feel, and it's funny too, because I think to some degree, we as a global society have decided that like early birds are better than night owls. And like, and that's such a funny thing if you think about it, because like we have the same number of productive hours in the day. It's just like different hours. And like, you know, for me, like I cherish my like, you know, early nighttime hours or like into the wee hours so much more. Like I would love to, like, I like seeing 2 a.m. I hate seeing 6 a.m., you know? So, and it just completely validates your choices to like be in a place that actually people are kind of living more of a similar rhythm, I think.
100%. Yeah. I mean, not to go down like a, you know, remote work path here, but like that is one of the big things that gets missed in that conversation about like, you know, bringing people into an office and all the benefits that you get from having people located in the same place and working the same hours and everything. And there's some validity to that. But then also like I work on a team with people who are super productive. Like I work on in the same time zone as a counterpart who he's often finishing up his day when I'm starting mine because I'm a super early bird. And like my most productive hours might be like 4, 5, 6, 7 a.m. depending on when I wake up. And he loves to work really, really late. He spends his days with his kids, then loves to work like 10 p.m. to like 3, 4 a.m. And that's just what works for him and whatever. But like our team is way more productive collectively because I'm working when it's optimal for me and he's working when it's optimal for him. And I think there's something like really, really cool about just embracing that.
Yeah, totally. No, it's super interesting. And like, for me, I have clients in California and that works great because I really don't mind taking meetings with them at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. at night. And I think it would be much harder actually for me to work with global clients from Spain if I didn't want to work late.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk more about Spain, but really quick, we keep talking about your company. And it's also fascinating to me because when I read your company name, I in my head say corazon, heart in Spanish, and you're moving to Spain. So I assumed that was the case, but I picked up on something right before we hit record that maybe it's not actually pronounced that way. So maybe there's a little story behind that. But can you kind of like introduce the company to us real quick? Because people might be wondering, like, why do you guys keep talking about it, but you're not telling us what it is?
Yeah. So you're not that far off on the pronunciation, but so I called my company Corazon, and Corazon is a storytelling and strategic communications consultancy. So we work with growth stage businesses to help them figure out their story, turn that into positioning, and then get that story out in front of the audiences that they're trying to reach in a way that really resonates with them on a human level. But I did deliberately call it Corazon and not Corazon. It doesn't have an accent on the O, which it should have to be grammatically correct in Spain. But I did that for a couple of reasons. So first of all, I chose the word corazon, how I'm saying the name, because it means heart, as you said in Spanish. And my fundamental ethos is about like communicating from the heart and, businesses that are run with heart. And that's about like caring about the people that work for you, caring about the people who you're serving, and caring about the investors who have trusted you enough to kind of invest in you, right? And I think bringing sort of humanity back to business is something that we have missed and moved away from recently. And at the end of the day, I don't care whether you're B2B or B2C, but there's people on the other end of that business decision. There's people who you're going to be partnering with, and there's people who your work affects their lives, right? And so that's kind of the reason that I chose the word and the reason I chose that approach. The anglicization of the word very much reflects me as a person. I'm kind of like a pseudo aspiring Spaniard who is really, a Brit, or at least an English speaker first and foremost. So I kind of liked that the word was a bit anglicized. I like that if you don't speak Spanish, you don't know what it means, and it's just a cool word. But if you do speak Spanish, then you kind of get a little bit of a sense of what I'm about. And I also frankly knew that if I put an accent on it, like, first of all, it would be too literal. And second of all, it would get left off all the time anyway. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to make everybody's lives easier and do this without that.
That's coming from someone who's done the whole accent conversation before and the language thing in different places. Like, you've had a little bit of international experience, and you can preemptively strike on avoiding that headache. I know people that have like started businesses and done cool things with foreign language words and then regretted it later because they're like, damn, from an SEO standpoint, like, this really sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. The fact that I have to compete with like a fair number of reggaeton songs for the top spot on Google is suboptimal and not something that I thought through before. But, when we're a massive global company, that won't be a problem anymore.
Yeah, that's right. I love it. I love the mission. I love how it ties into your story, and the play on words and stuff is all really, really cool too. And coming from like a word wizard like yourself, like that, it makes sense that it was beyond just like the best word that would pop up from an SEO standpoint or something. Like, it really connects with you. And I think that's really cool that like you have this bloodline to Spain that also has been part of your story and like kind of called you back there. And so I don't know, just seeing all the little dots connect is part of why I love doing this podcast, because I get to go deeper on some of this stuff than I would in maybe just a regular conversation. So yeah, I think that's a really cool part of the story.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been fun. And I think like I'm someone that I mean, I built a whole business about like being from the heart, right? So like, I wasn't going to just choose a word that was going to perform well on SEO, because it's just like not how I believe in running things. But yeah.
Absolutely. So, so circling back to Spain real quick, so of all Spain, you narrow it in on Spain, but then you picked Madrid, which Madrid speaks for itself. It's an epic city. But did you consider living anywhere else? Was it always Madrid? How did you work through that process of like choosing the location?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm from the islands. My family's from Menorca. I love Mallorca with all my heart, and I spend a lot of time there during the summer. And like, wouldn't it be great if that was a viable place all year round? But the truth is, I travel a lot for work, so I needed somewhere that had like really good flight connections. So that wasn't, and I'm also a city girl. So like those two things like kind of meant that the islands weren't viable as as a year round option. A lot of people thinking about moving to Spain have the like Barcelona, Madrid calculation. And I definitely went through that for a little bit. I think Barcelona is an incredible city for a lot of people. It's very international. You've got the ocean, which is a huge plus. But I personally have just never connected or resonated with the vibe of Barcelona quite as much. And I think maybe it is specifically because it's not as Spanish as Madrid is. And that's in terms of the food and the people and all of that. And the fact that it's in Catalonia rather than Madrid, which is, the capital of Spain. So it's no hate on Barcelona. It's just that those are the reasons that ultimately like it wasn't the right choice for me. And I think when I was thinking about moving to Spain, I was like, I want to be in the most Spanish place that I could go. And like, where else other than the capital of Spain. And it's also really interesting because I've been talking to a lot of people about this recently of like, the first time I dabbled with moving to Madrid was actually in 2021. I spent a couple of months here. I had a fully remote job at the time that let me do that. But then ultimately like circumstances changed back in London and I couldn't commit to the full-time move. But had I moved 2 years ago, it would have been a radically different experience than moving right now. And I think if you think about the popularity of a city as a bell curve, in 2021 or early 2022, we were at the very thin part of the first tail end of the bell curve in terms of Madrid's popularity. Now we're very much on the slope where we're going rapidly up, that kind of inflection point, and you really see it. Like Madrid is absolutely booming, and like there's so many international people moving here. They've introduced the digital nomad visa. They have all sorts of like great conditions for encouraging people to invest in Spain. And you really see that changing the face of the city in terms of the sorts of businesses that are opening up here, the sorts of people. I have like a whole international friend group here. And it really feels like this is a city that is stepping onto the global stage, even in a way that it hasn't before, despite having been a European capital and having been an incredibly cool place for a lot longer than I've been thinking about moving here. But yeah, so I think I was really keen to sort of, despite, never having properly learned to surf in California, I know the basics, and I wanted to sort of ride that wave of Madrid's popularity.
I love that. That is a really perfect way to describe it, actually. Like, when I moved to Spain in, what would that have been, 2018, I think. Yeah, 2018. I feel even then, like that's not that long ago. And I feel like the perception of Spain as a destination, and specifically within that, a few places, Madrid definitely being one of them, probably the one actually in my mind, has changed dramatically. And it's for a variety of the reasons that you said, but the secret is definitely out, if it was even a secret then. Like when I moved to Valencia, for example, like Valencia was a hidden gem at that time. Like it was not well known. It was like a little Barcelona, and it still is in a lot of ways. I would describe it as like a little Barcelona. Like I think you get with Valencia, for example, I think you get a lot of the pros of Barcelona without all the cons, such as like, just like over tourism and high cost of living, like relative to Spain pricing. You're also like, for me, it was also an important thing. I wanted to be in a very like Spanish place. I wanted to learn Spanish. No offense to Catalan. I preferred to learn Spanish. And yeah, I wanted that kind of like real Spanish experience. And I also think it's interesting. You mentioned like, I'm a city girl. Like for me, I know about myself, like I'm kind of a mid city guy. Like I like the mid tier cities. So Valencia like checked a lot of boxes for me in that way. And so I'm kind of mentioned that because I think your point about, Madrid being a destination that's changing in the eyes of the world is totally on point. The same goes for Spain. Everybody I talk to, my friends scattered throughout Spain, everybody's saying the same thing. Like it's just kind of like blowing up as a destination. And then also, I think it's really important for anybody thinking about going abroad to like, it might be very attractive to go to Barcelona because that's what you've heard of, or that's what you've seen in an Ed Sheeran music video or whatever it may be. Like you're like that's what calls to you. But when you go through and you start checking the boxes, like what really calls to you, there are very like logical things like, hey, I travel a lot. As cool as it sounds to live on the Balearic Islands, like might be a little bit challenging if I have to get away, every month for a business meeting. So just thinking through all these things is like, sometimes it seems so obvious in retrospect, but I mean, I've talked to so many people who have made the move abroad to a place and like not actually thought through what really calls to them and what really fits their lifestyle. And it's not just sunshine, and it's not just mountains, and it's not just city. It's like, you have to think a little bit deeper than that when you make this big leap.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think you're spot on about that. And that's sort of what I was getting at earlier too, of like, as compelling as it might be to spin a globe and pick a spot on the map and go there, an international move is a serious life change. And in order to make sure that it's going to work for you, it's important to think through what makes you happy in terms of the things in your life that you maybe even take for granted, right? For example, a good transport network in a city. Like if you're someone that values public transport, like thinking about that sort of thing is important. And people's treatment of foreigners is another perfect example of like making sure that you're going somewhere that you're going to be able to get the experience that you want to get and that like meshes with you well enough as a person, I think is pretty important. And obviously it depends the period of time that you want to go for. Like, you could move to a desert island for a couple of months and probably be super happy, but it's a different thing if you're trying to build a life.
Yeah, totally. On that note, has anything underwhelmed you? Well, I mean, guess let's start a little bit more broad. Like how has the experience been overall? I often find like for a lot of people, the first few months are a mix of extremes. It's like, it's extremely exciting and fun and everything's new and novel. And then at the same time, like this is when you're dealing with the bureaucracy and the visas, and there's, the challenges of working in a foreign language. And so it can be like a life of two extremes for a few months, and you're sort of still in that phase. So what's your experience been?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, so first of all, like just a complete whirlwind. And like, I got here in January, and like me being me, I didn't want to take any risks of like that I wouldn't have a place to live or I would be homeless at like any point in my like nascent stages of living in Spain. So I had prepaid for Airbnbs for a couple of months when I got here. What I didn't realize was that my first Airbnb was essentially a bunker. So I lived like a mole rat for a month, like in like darkness. Like it was really tough. And I was like, this is great. I moved to Spain, 300 days a year of sunshine. This is going to be awesome. And then I ended up in this place where in order to check the weather every day, I had to literally open my front door and like look up 20 floors because I was in the basement of this and Spanish apartment buildings are set up to have they have an interior courtyard. So some apartments look onto the street and some of them look into this interior courtyard. So I was in the interior courtyard, the basement level. And it was just like, it was really dungeony. And I was like also trying to start my business and do work calls. And I was like, I'm really sorry. Like, I promise I don't actually live in a cave. Like, this is just like my current situation. So that was a slightly tough start to my only word of advice is like, read the reviews on Airbnb really thoroughly before you commit to something like that. So
Can I
that was a
can
little
I
bit
share a
tough.
story? I have to share
Yeah,
it. My
please.
this is so funny. Okay, so when we moved to Valencia, we are you familiar with the festival Las Fallas in Valencia yet?
Yes, I
Yes.
am. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So just like very quickly for anybody that's not, it's basically just like a fireworks festival for 3 weeks. We'll sum it up. Lots of fire and lots of fireworks. And the fireworks meaning like little bombs that people throw all day and night. And there's parties for 3 weeks. It's a lot of fun if you don't have to wake up and work. But anyway, we moved there right before that, and because of that, like Fias is super like all the Airbnbs are rented out. So we were trying to do the same as you. We wanted to rent an Airbnb for 3 months and just have our home base for 3 months and figure our stuff out. So that was super, super hard to find. But we ended up finding one that was available, and the guy we got it worked out. But we thought it was a 1 bedroom. It ended up being a studio, and so I'll take a studio over a bunker. I can't complain there, but that is a little bit hard when you're living, like three beings in one small space and trying to like do life and stuff. Anyway, we got past that. What we really didn't know is that it was on the first, what in America we would call like the second floor, but the first floor in Europe, like, so you're like, a couple meters off the ground, and right below us was a fallera, like a club, a social club where they hold fias parties every single night and have bonfires and fireworks and stuff. And so we're sleeping in this little studio for the first 3 weeks that we're there, with basically like parties going on right below us, and we're like, this is what we signed up for. Like we're not going to sleep for 3 weeks. And anyway, it's just like the thing that I think is funny is that you just don't know what you're getting yourself into. Like you're kind of making this big commitment, and then you get there and you're like, all right, this is what I got.
Yeah, you really don't. And the Fias thing is particularly funny. I have a friend in Valencia who I keep trying to do a house swap with. And she's like, hey, do you want to come for Fias? She's like, it's great. You're going to love it. But I'm desperate to leave.
That's how you know you're a local. Like first year you do FIAS and you're like, this is awesome. Second year you're like, I'll be there for a couple days and then I'm going to get out of town. And then like third year you're like, how do I sublet my place for 3 weeks?
Yeah, seriously. But yeah, I mean, these are the things that you don't know when you're a foreigner arriving for the first time, and so that was an interesting surprise. But other than that, I have to say I've been very pleasantly surprised by everything, and I think like I said at the start of the conversation that I was kind of like I was uncomfortable about being comfortable. And like getting here, just everything is new. Everything's uncomfortable. I don't have a gym. I don't have a coffee place. I don't have a run route. Like, you're figuring everything out for the first time. And that was like a breath of fresh air for me. Like, I absolutely loved that. And as I've started to try to get some of those pieces sorted, I've realized, you mentioned bureaucracy, like Spain loves bureaucracy and like they love to say no and they love to like do things by the book. And this is coming from England where they're pretty good at that as well. So that piece of it has been interesting. But, on the flip side of it, I've never met like warmer people. I've been just, it's a very, I don't know if you found this as well, but I found Spain to be a very like the more the merrier culture and a very kind of come one, come all situation. And sometimes I think I'm going to lunch with one friend and then there ends up being 10 of us. And it's, that sort of thing that's really nice and really nice as a new person showing up here to be kind of included in things. So yeah, that has been a really welcome surprise. And the weather, obviously, I came from London, so it was a pretty low bar, but
yeah, it's funny how it's relatively close, but the weather difference is going to make a positive impact on you for sure.
yeah.
I'm glad to hear it's going well, and it sounds like it's been relatively not too bumpy. So I hope that continues for you. On that note, like very high level, I mean, especially considering Brexit and especially considering Spain is such a destination for a lot of Brits. And do you have a US passport as well?
I do.
Actually,
Yeah.
you
So I
do.
have
Okay.
British and
So you
US.
can
Yeah.
speak to a lot of the audience here on this, like coming from your situation with like British passport and US passport. Was it relatively easy to make the move to Spain, or are there any like challenges that you would kind of warn people against?
Yeah. So, and yeah, I mean, a quick story on Brexit of like, having my UK passport, I never thought growing up that I would have to think about moving to Europe in terms of being like a logistical headache. Um, and I was actually on the Eurostar from France to Paris from Paris to London in 2016 on the day that the vote result came out. And I had not voted because I was in the US and I was 24 and I was too lazy to figure out how to submit a ballot, quite honestly. I've never lived to regret a decision more in my life. So everybody go vote. But yeah, I think logistically it's not that bad. I think thinking through your timing is super important because both Americans and Brits can come here on a 90-day tourist visa. So you can come to Spain, but if you're going to do that before you have your like working visa or residency or whatever figured out, then know that the clock starts at 90 days. And like at the end of the 90 days, you have to have your visa sorted out. I'm on, or I'm still processing, but it's called a non-lucrative visa, which is slightly different than the digital nomad visa. And it's not, so basically my advice is like explore your visa options, because what I thought was going to be right for me ultimately did not end up being the one that was right for me this year. It might be different next year and I'll reassess at that point. But I think like, doing the research rather than making a knee-jerk reaction on what your path to entry is going to be is important. And also thinking through your timeline of like, do I want to get all my visa stuff sorted before I go, or am I going to go on a tourist visa and then know that the clock starts at 90 days and figure it out from there? And then understanding the rules of like, when you travel and you leave the country and how that affects your ability to come back in or your right to stay or that sort of thing. So it's just a piece of research that's really worth doing if you're considering like an actual move.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give a quick shout out to Lexity, our partner for this season, who's been the company that's helped me navigate all that space. So, that whenever I need help with visas in really just about any country in Europe, but particularly they've helped me in Spain, they helped me get my EU residency. And like that's been a massive change. And hugely beneficial. So I'm a big fan of like hiring somebody to help you do this. Lexity's who I go to, obviously, but like whatever you do, I think like there's a lot to be said for just like getting someone to help you navigate this. And it's also good. Something you mentioned there that I actually didn't know was that you can come on the 90-day visa, the tourist visa. So basically just show up and then figure out the non-lucrative visa from there. I also did the non-lucrative visa when I went to Spain. The digital nomad visa didn't exist at that time. And I had to do, or I was under the impression that I had to do everything beforehand. So I kind of got it all sorted with my consulate back in the US, with the Spanish consulate back in the US, which was really the only way for me. I think this is also something to highlight here for people. Like even if you have those two options, it's really important to think through what situation is really like, what level of risk are you willing to accept? In Camilla's case, like she's from London, she's a 2-hour flight back home if things don't work out. In my case, we're like, a whole family with a big dog and trying to travel across the world. And like that would have been very hard. So I needed to have it secured ahead of time. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great point, right? Like the physical like barrier to entry, I guess, is like lower when you're just moving from the UK to Europe. But I definitely second what you said about having somebody help you with this, because I thought like, I'm just going to read some blogs, I'm going to be able to figure it out. But no, that's a bad plan. Like, it's just it's not worth it. And like, I would have ended up like with very, very different outcomes and worse outcomes had I tried to do this stuff myself. There's reasons that people are like qualified to help you in this stuff. And finding a partner that you trust to help you do that, I think is like really critical. So I'm glad you have one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like we covered quite a bit, and I know we could keep you going for a long time here, but did we miss anything? Any part of the story that you feel like we should make sure the audience knows, or anything else that we should have covered during this conversation?
I don't think so. I think we sort of covered everything. I think, the main takeaway that like I wish somebody had said to me a couple of years ago maybe is like, if you really feel a strong calling for something, it probably means that it's right for you. Whether that's moving internationally or whether that's starting your own company. And I'm glad that I did things the way that I did them, with the timing and the consideration and all of this sort of thing. But ultimately, like, your gut doesn't lead you astray very often. So if you have an inclination for one of those things or another, it's worth spending the time to explore it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's an awesome way to end this, because like, and the truth is that it has never been easier than it is right now. And so like, if you were ever doubting that this is possible, whatever your circumstances are, there's probably a way that you can start the business or move abroad or whatever it is. Like, the information's at our fingertips. From the move abroad standpoint, there's literally countries out there fighting for you to, they're trying to attract you to come stay and live there for a year or more at a time. So the opportunity's there, and like, if you have that calling, it's not for everyone, but if you have that calling, you owe it to yourself to give it a shot and see how it goes. Worst case scenario, you go back home and start back where you were.
Yeah, right. I think that's exactly right. And even in that case, you will have learned a lot about what's right for you and what isn't. So it's a no lose situation.
100%. Well, thank you very much, Camilla. This was super fun. It's great to catch up with you again. And like, I'm loving watching the journey of, I know it's not Corazon now, it's Corazon. And I'm loving watching what you're building, and I hope people will go and check it out. Where can people follow along, like connect with you, learn more about the company, follow your story, all of the above? We'll place these links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, great. And please do. I love new friends, virtual or in real life. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Camilla Boyer. It'll be in the show notes, as you mentioned. My website is highcorazon.com if you're interested in working with us. And those are the important ones, I think.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I hope to see you soon, either in Spain or somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, sounds good. I hope so.
Thanks, Camilla. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed. Or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.